Okay, welcome everybody. Let's get started. I know Dylan's going to wander in. Okay. Hmm. Feel your body. The body is the portal to presence for us while we're in the body. When we're done with this body, all we are is presence. For now, we have a portal. One way or another, we try to spend a lot of time leaving this. It's just habitual. Everything in the culture pulls you out, outwards, outwards, outwards. It actually takes effort to leave this portal, but we're well trained. So coming back home to the one, to the self, the capital S self, does not take any effort to go somewhere, because how could you leave your actual self? It does, however, require to let go of all the distractions, of all the forces, of everything that's trying to pull us out of ourself. And the moment we do, here we are, now, in this moment, in this presence. And it's not even a moment, because moment is a term associated with time. And presence is not in time. It's eternal. It's not in space. It's infinite. And we each know this of ourselves intimately, though many have forgotten. So we sit together like this to help each other remember. Whenever two or more come together in the name of the one, the field is amplified by our presence. And in turn, that accelerates our own remembrance. For awakening really is remembrance. And here we are. So grateful, here we are. On the personality level, we're all different, each having a unique storyline. On the presence level, there's just one here. So it's really interesting and useful to allow ourselves to be aware of both levels, if you will, simultaneously. So we don't go into denial of one or the other, for that doesn't work. Aware of presence, aware of the story and the history and the personality. And in allowing both to be present, the integration happens, the remembrance, bringing home the fragments that we've unconsciously created. Not through any fault, It was simply that we live in a culture that taught us the wrong stuff. So our presence matters, because in presence, we're all connected constantly. And then when we walk down the street, the light that is shining through us is the one. And it's quietly, sometimes very much in the background, helping others remember. And so in gratitude, we just let this flow through us. We invite this to use this thing called us. And that puts us in the service of life, the service of existence, capital E, the service of the presence, the service of the field, capital F. Infinite power, infinite intelligence, infinite compassion, infinite awareness, operating as a local instance of each one of us. And into this we say yes. Here's Dylan. Greetings, Earthling. So tonight's subject, I felt like we need to do this one across 2 sessions. It's a big one. Opening to death, which necessitates opening to grief. You can't have one without the other. Which necessitates opening to life. They're all connected. If we cut out one, we cut out it all. In the email I sent out, Nisargadatta said, I am not afraid of death because I'm not afraid of life. What does that suggest? Well, for starters, who you think you are will die. Who you actually are will not. What does that suggest? What is that? We come in, we take birth. We're born into an emotional matrix, a cultural matrix, a familiar matrix, a physical matrix, and we're given a name and we're taught that's who we are, and then we're given a set of beliefs and we're taught that's who we are, and we're giving a set of clothes and we're taught that's who we are, and I'm giving a career and well, that's who we are, that's who we are, that's who we are. But who are we before any of that? Well, if you're a pure materialist, of which science is grounded in, you're a nothing. You didn't exist, and you won't exist afterwards.
We're a spark of God.
Yeah.
We're a soul.
Yeah, and when I'm asking these questions, I'm often asking without the concept, because we bring concepts in, they're helpful. They are. I mean, they're useful, unless we stop there. The Zen koan, one of them is, what was your face before you were born? So we have a personality, call it the ego layer, that Part of its job is to keep this body functioning, to keep this body alive. So it's predicated on survival. Comes in with this incarnation, becomes a thing called Eric in this case, and that's going. That's going. If that's what I believe I am, and that's all I believe I am, I'm right to be afraid of death because it's going away. Now, if you've ever been on a fairly strong dose of the right psychedelic, you may have had an alternate experience. There's this idea, and not psychedelically related, although it's quite an effective pathway, of dying before you die. Essentially ego death. Anybody have had that on?
Is that what they do for ayahuasca?
Well,
The soul retrieval?
it certainly is one of the medicines that can bring you there. For those who've experienced, would you share, like, what was the essential part of that for you?
Of that experience?
Yeah.
It was like seeing past the optical illusion and remembering the actual shape of the thing moving in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you're looking at the optical illusion, it's like, is that a square popping out or going in?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, it's, you know, whatever I thought it was, it's like literally the opposite of that. And then it's this like profoundly liberating relief that that's actually what it is. And that's actually what I am. And it's like a remembering.
It's a remembering.
It doesn't feel like new information. It feels
Right.
like information I have forgotten my whole life.
Exactly.
And I go, oh my God, thank God.
Exactly.
Yeah, probably the best way.
It's a remembering. Anyone else?
I have something that's like related but different, but when I've been on certain medicines or on absolutely nothing but having my own very psychedelic sober experience, when I go to see myself in the mirror, I see obviously Melissa and like my face, but everything looks entirely different to me when I look at myself, and I just see like the absolute, it's either what I'm seeing as me or the eyes that I'm seeing with are 100% purified, and all I see is like the truth of the being that I am, that everyone is, and it's an entirely different, I look entirely different to myself.
Beautiful.
Can
Go ahead.
I was going to share. I'm going to share, but I don't want to stop you.
No, go ahead.
Well, for me, it was one breath to the next, and it was like, would I breathe again? And when I took another breath, I realized I was alive. And then when I exhaled, I wasn't sure I was going to take another breath again. So it was breath, death, breath, I'm alive, death. And it went on like that for quite a while.
Was there any fear present?
It was somewhere there, but there was nothing. I was no body. I was no place. I was no nothing. I was only breath to breath.
Wow.
And there was no other consciousness. There was nothing else other than breath to breath. It was, I mean, I got to say, from this perspective, it was terrifying. It was difficult, but in the moment, it was like, am I going to breathe again? I'm breathing again. Am I going to breathe again? I breathed again. That's all I got.
So interesting. So in the approach to that, I'll call the event horizon, you know, where your breathing experience is totally in the center, in the presence, it wasn't. But in the approach to it, it was that fear.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
I had something similar.
Can you talk up a little louder?
Yeah. I had a fear that I wouldn't be able to breathe. And was a letting go. It was letting go of life,
Yeah.
letting go of the breath, and finding myself breathing, but so much peace that it could all end now. This life could end now. And it's okay
Yeah.
because I'm not feeling scared. I'm not worried, and I just felt peace.
Mhm.
And it did shift. I'm not saying fully, but it did shift the fear of death since.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I can attest to all that.
But
Yeah.
I was just going to add to these stories. So I've had several of these, and where I feel like I fall into some kind of vortex, and when I come out of that, wake up almost, I wake up as if I feel as if I'm in a parallel universe. And yet in this universe, I'm totally liberated from all the shackles of my personality. And it is total, like the first time it ever happened, I'm just jumping up and down going, I'm free, I'm free, I'm free. And and then, eventually that just kind of, I come back down or come back into my body or back into everyday consciousness after a while. But for a long period of time, I actually experienced being in a other reality of my being. And it's pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm. And you could never fully come back to the way you were before.
No. That becomes, yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's a new baseline
Yeah, it's
because
a
it
new
is
baseline.
so profoundly true. In Hebrew school, they talked about a veil of forgetfulness, that when you're taking on an incarnation, which then obviously means that Judaism has a reference to reincarnation, but when you take it on, there's this veil of forgetfulness to keep you focused into this incarnation. So you don't get distracted by so many, who knows, thousands or millions of other incarnations we've had. But I think the important thing is be here now and to allow ourselves to remember. Remember, we've been indoctrinated into a false narrative of what we are. And accompanied with that necessitates a fear of death. Because a lot of what that belief system says is, you're the body. You're the body. And letting go, you mentioned that. This is essential, that the practice of life, and I'm, sometimes I quote a little Ram Dass here because he agrees with everything I say. The practice of life, as the Buddhists and the Tibetans say, the whole purpose of life is to practice for the next death. That sounds kind of like weird, etc. But think about this. The exhale, as Howard was talking about, what is that? It's a letting go. Moment to moment, what is it that we're being called to do is a letting go. The Buddha said the source of suffering is what? Anybody?
Craving.
Clinging of the mind. Right, the clinging of the mind. Because what's the nature of reality? The
Present moment.
constant dynamic, it's a very dynamic energy field. Nothing can be created or destroyed in the sense of the pure energy. It's just shifting all the time. And if that's the nature of reality, and we're made in that image, then any part of our system that tries to cling, to stop that flow, is fundamentally working against the flow of what we actually are, and there's the source of suffering. And so the letting go of this moment into the next is what? It's dying into the moment, into the next. It's dying into the moment, it's all it is. It's all it is. And so it's really valuable to just start simply noticing, where's the clinging going on in this consciousness? Now, some of this is pretty easy. Some of it, like when you think about the love of your family, and in a lot of cases, you know, the cushy life, if we have a cushy life, and the other various things, we're hooked all over the place. And ultimately, we're moving to a point in the flow where guarantee we're just gonna have to let it all go. And they say that we die the way we live. So if you spend your entire life clinging and clinging and clinging and grasping and holding and trying to control reality, that's the way you're gonna leave. Not much fun. However, we start to recognize this as a profound spiritual practice, if you will. But more than that, that it is the true nature of what we are, is to simply be in this dynamic flow. We can let go of the control, we can let go of the clinging. And if we can't quite do it, because trust me, we all have these various levels of clinging and hooks, the willingness to let go is good enough. And Course in Miracles says, all you have to do is be willing, and then the higher self comes in and can take over. Somebody asked Ram Dass, if you knew this was your last day on earth, what would you do? And I've taken to heart his answer, because it really, this is good, this is good. And he said, I spend my days quieting my mind, opening my heart, and doing what I can to alleviate suffering. And if this was the last day on earth for me, I would do what I could do to quiet my mind, open my heart, and alleviate suffering. And then everything becomes a form of that. We're going to listen to Ram Dass tonight for about 30 or so minutes, part one, and then next time we'll continue, and so I'll bring that on, and it's so good. This was done in May of 1992, and in New York. I may have been there because I moved out here in March of 92, and I've been going back and forth, and I may or may not, but it's a really good talk. So I'll put some of that on. And death and grief, we kind of weave together in ways. We'll talk about that either later or next time, kind of thing. But before we do, consider this. How many cells in your body that were present the day you were born are still there in your body? 0. If you're the body, which part of the body were you that went away? If somebody loses an arm, they're still here. Which part of the body contains them there, you know? So the materialistic scientism, and I use that phrase on purpose, is predicated on, frankly, an unfounded belief that the material world is the base of it all, of reality, and then consciousness and all else is emergent from that. Well, these guys back here, who I trust a lot more when it comes to these subjects, tell us it's the opposite. Consciousness is primary, and all else comes from that, including the physical body. And if you've ever read about or talked to somebody, or I don't know if anybody on here today have had an NDE, a near-death experience, they know the difference. There are people who are in comas who could tell the doctors what's going on the other floor of the hospital. How's that possible if the brain is the source of consciousness, when in that fact they were unconscious? So things are not the way they appear. If you ever want to read a really interesting book around that kind of a thing, read Anita Moorjani's book, Dying to Be Me. She was basically a day away from terminal cancer leaving her body. The doctor said to the family, say goodbye. And she had she went into a coma, out of body experience, was shown the nature of her true self and the reason why the cancer came, and completely altered everything. You had a complete shift of her perception and her relationship to her true self, and knew when she came back that the cancer was going to be gone. And that's what happened. The game is much bigger than we've been taught. And to have any kind of a semblance, to open up, to the idea, just open up to the fears that we harbor around this, is so not just valuable, but I say imperative. Because think about it, what Nisargadatta said, if I'm afraid of death, then the I that is afraid of death, frankly, is the ego. All it's doing is constantly looking for a threat to protect itself from. That gets in the way of living. And I don't mean simply metaphorically. I mean, it blocks your life force. Now, what is living? What is the source of your life? The life force. So you see the crazy upside downness of this thought system called the ego's thought system. So everybody present here right now knows we're in a different trajectory. We know the game is bigger than we've been thinking or taught. Something in us knows this. It's the thing that's awakening. This is not a coincidence that we're all sitting together, that we're all helping to reinforce the truth for each other, that we help each other awaken, that we help each other remember. And so I invite it in. I invite you to invite it in. Let yourself see whatever fear is harboring. Because if you don't, each one of those places is a bar in the jail cell. And then it feels really uncomfortable, and then it gets really anxious, and it could get depressing, and it can get all sorts of manifestations of that. And so then we go to a therapist, as Ram Dass says, who helps us rearrange the furniture in our jail cell. Oh, gee, that looks different. That feels a little bit more comfortable, better. But we're not designed to be living in the jail cell. It's be in the personality, but know that you're greater. And the only way to get there, in a sense, in your moment-to-moment flow of experience, is to welcome in whatever fears there are hanging around this. Now, fear is an interesting one. I think we've talked about fear. It's good. We'll have a whole session on that kind of thing. The nature of fear is, fear itself is afraid. I had this experience of. And therefore, what it does is to protect itself, it creates a layer around itself of a secondary fear that says, be afraid to look this way. This is going on, for most people unconsciously. But what's the nature of waking up? It's to become more and more conscious, more and more conscious, more and more conscious. That line between the conscious and the unconscious is fluid. And the more conscious you are, the less unconscious you are. And so the moment you decide to look straight on at the fear, it's a complete game changer. So what is fear essentially? It is something in us that is held in darkness. But is darkness an actual entity? When we leave here and turn off the light switch, do I turn a second switch on that's called darkness? No. What's darkness? The absence of light. Now, what's the source of light in your consciousness? You, but not you, the personality, you as the presence. Now, if we listen to the fear that says, don't look this way, you're the spotlight. So you're looking away, and that part of your psyche is staying in darkness. You see the cosmic joke right there. The moment you turn and look and be in presence with something inside that is, we call fear, that's the end. It starts melting. So, I invite that in. I'm going to turn on this.
Us.
Yeah, enjoy this. This is really good. There we go. Let me do that. I think you should be able to see it online, hear it online, guys, so you let me know. Not that. Here we go.
Be here now. For some of you, coming to this morning session is a lark, and for some of you, it's a little threatening and frightening. And I recognize all of that, and I appreciate that we all realize that part of our agenda as people of any age is to find some way of being with the idea of death. I know that's why you are here. There's a tombstone inscription that I think many of you have heard. Dear friend, please know as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you will be. Prepare yourself to follow me. And we are preparing ourselves. Take that as a blessing from beyond. I realize it's very presumptuous to get up and talk about death as if I know. But I have a lot of chutzpah. That's Sanskrit for... And something has happened to me as a result of my meanderings through the realms of consciousness over the past 30 years that has changed my attitudes towards death. A lot of the fear that death generated that led to denial has gone from me. I'm one of the strange people that absolutely delights and enjoys being with people as they're dying. In fact, it is at such incredible grace for me that in the morning when I know I'm going to be with such a person, I get absolutely thrilled in my body, my being. Because I know I'm going to have an opportunity to be in the presence of truth. So I would like to share with you this perspective and stories and images and talk for maybe half of our time and then work with questions and answers. We are living at a time where birth has come out of the closet in the past 20, 30, 40 years, and death is just beginning to come out of the closet. It is now beginning to be acceptable to consider the possibility that people actually die. Usually in our culture, it has been put behind doors, behind sheets, you don't talk to the children about it, you don't show anybody. And for me, who has grown up in that culture, it was quite an experience when I started to live in India, where when somebody dies, they are put on a pallet and wrapped in a silk sheet or sheet, and then carried through the streets to the burning grounds with Satya Hey, Satya Ha, with a mantra being recited as they go through the streets. And the death is public for everybody to see. The body is right there, it's not in a box, it's not hidden. And because India is a place of the extended family and very few and inadequate hospitals, most people are dying at home, so that most people as they grow up have been in the presence of someone dying. While in our culture, an amazing number of people, even at middle age, have never been in the presence of someone dying. They have walked away from it and hidden from it. And I was one of them, and I have certainly changed in the past 25 years. I think the reason that I changed was that, and I know this will offend some of you, but truth is always difficult, that through my experiences with psychedelic chemicals, you might say, particularly originally the mushrooms of Mexico, which were used by curanderos and oracles in Mexican religions, and the mushrooms have been used throughout religious history, actually, for mystical experiences. Through that first experience, I came in contact with a part of my being that, as an adult, I had not identified with, I had not acknowledged. And it was a part of my being that lay behind my social roles, behind my personality. And it was indeed a part of my being that didn't seem to have much to do with birth and death. It could be called soul or awareness or spirit or God or whatever. And for me, who was a Western social psychologist, professor at Harvard, materialist, philosophical materialist, that experience was an extremely confusing one, because there was nothing in my armamentarium of scientific methodology or in psychology that prepared me to deal with that component of my being. Once I experienced that being, it started to profoundly change the nature of my life after that, of who I thought I was. Because up until then, I had identified with that which dies. And as long as you identify with that which dies, there is always fear of death, because it's the fear of cessation of existence. And I realize now that although I didn't know the form that it would take after death, I knew that what there was about something about the essence of my awareness was outside of death. Now, the interesting thing for me at that time was that when I had that experience, it was what I call ineffable, indescribable, because I had no concepts to deal with what I was finding in my being. Probably had I been more emotionally connected to my Jewish roots, I would have found in the Kabbalah, the Book of Brilliance and so on, I would have found metaphors and analogies for what I experienced. But I wasn't. And the book that came to my attention, that was brought to my attention by Aldous Huxley, who was part of our project and visiting at MIT that year, was a book called The Tibetan Book of the Dead. And what happened to me when I read the Tibetan Book of the Dead was I was reading descriptions of the direct experiences I was having with the mushrooms. Now, this was very confusing to me, again, because this book was 2,500 years old. I thought I was at the leading edge of the unknown. And here was a very ancient text, a book that was used by monks, by lamas, read to fellow lamas at the point they were dying and for the days following their death, whispered in their ear, about the process of dying. Out of that, my colleague Timothy Leary and my other colleague Ralph Metzner and I began to see the Tibetan Book of the Dead in metaphorical terms as a story of psychological death and rebirth, even though it was used as physical death and rebirth. And so we did a book called The Psychedelic Experience, which was a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead for going through this psychological death rebirth. And I really think that although it has been made trivial in a way, the idea that's a biblical idea, the idea of dying and being born into truth or wisdom or spirit is really what our business is that we're talking about when we deal with death. And that as you have extricated yourself from a solid identification with body and with personality and with materiality, you begin to have spaciousness to allow for the possibility that death may be part of process rather than end. I feel that very deeply. People say, do you believe that there is continuity after death? And I say, I don't believe it, it is, which offends my scientific friends no end, but belief is something you hold with your intellect, and this is going way beyond that now. So you may be just sharing my total pathology. I have no idea, and that it's up to your intuition to decide that. I would never know if I was completely crazy, so. To show you how crazy I am, I have a friend who some of you have met through books, a friend named Emmanuel. Emmanuel is a spook, a being that has dropped his body somewhere along the way and speaks through a lovely woman named Pat Rodegast. And I must point out to you when I'm talking about channeled beings that all beings that don't have bodies aren't wise, that there are as many schlock people without bodies as there are with them, and there are a lot of well-meaning beings who've left their bodies and want to send back messages like buy United States Steel, and they don't know any more than they knew before. So you have to be very discriminating when dealing with disembodied beings in the same way as you are with embodied beings. But Emmanuel has a lot of nachas. He has a lot of real wisdom, and he's like an uncle to me. He's just wonderful fun. And when I said to Emmanuel, I deal a lot with the fear of dying in this culture and death. What should I tell people? And he said, Ramdas, tell them that death is absolutely safe. I just put those two things together and realized what a far out line that is. Death is absolutely safe. And then he added one more image. He said, it's like taking off a tight shoe. Okay, can you hear that one? Like taking off a tight shoe. Now just imagine that you as spirit or awareness have contained yourself in an incarnation or contained it in a conceptual model of who you are and on a storyline. And then at some point, you dissolve out of that, you break out of that, and there is this incredible release quality. Well, these kinds of things I'm talking about are very different from the way in which our culture is presently treating death. Presently, we see death as an enemy. The medical profession sees death as a failure. The temple of life is the intensive care unit. The medical person is the priest. When that became unacceptable, we then moved towards the hospice movement. Now, the hospice movement is extremely useful in coming back to a psychologically supportive environment, because intensive care units don't allow babies, they don't allow dogs, they don't allow flowers, they don't allow human connections, give you psychological support. And the hospice movement was very interested in providing psychological support. And as such, it has played a useful role. And it provides a warm setting, either in the home or in a hospice residential space, for people to have psychological support and respect and dignity as a human, as a personality, while they are dying. I want to support hospice and at the same moment express my reservations, because hospice, in order to be fully acceptable into the economic structures of society, meaning Medicare and so on, has avoided the spiritual aspects. And it has done so quite intentionally, actually. And I find that Cecily Saunders, who started the hospice movement, who I think is a very caring human being, still says death is an outrage. And I personally don't experience that. So that I want to support the hospice movement as a step in the right direction, but I want to say that we have a lot further to go in terms of what our possibilities are for creating environments for people as they're dying, where they can have the spaciousness to explore the process they're going through, without being surrounded by people who feel sorry for where they are. And what I have tried to do with Stephen Levine and his wife Andrea and Dale Borglum, a number of people, is over the years create a space. We've had different programs like Dial a Death, where you can call up and talk to people and have pillow talk with people to share with them the process of staying conscious through dying. We've had a dying center. We had one in New Mexico. My model was, I knew that my being with people that were dying, here's my predicament. I'm incarnated, and I have all of the stuff that goes with an incarnation. The deepest one is what's called first chakra. For those of you in those systems, understand those systems, which is the fear of survival. It's preoccupation with survival. I know that if I am going to work on myself spiritually in this lifetime, one of the things I want to do is work with my fear of death. And the way I can do that is by being around death during my lifetime. In the Theravadan Buddhist tradition, for example, they send the monks out to the cemeteries to spend the nights in the cemeteries. And in that tradition, they throw the bodies out there uncovered for the birds to eat it. So the whole thing is ecologically sound. So you go out there and you sit with the bloated corpse, the fly-infested corpse, the skeleton, and you get a chance to be aware of all the process of nature. And you watch your own disgust and loathing and fear, and as I am now, so you will be. Prepare yourself to follow me. And it's in a way beginning to see the whole way that the body is decaying and meditating on decay, so that you can find the place in you that has nothing to do with that by opening to that, rather than, because the denial of it keeps you stuck in it. That's the problem. Denial keeps you fixated. And so part of the work, and that's why I wanted to get as close to the dying process as I possibly could. So the combination of the two things, one was that something had happened inside of me, which was a spiritual awakening that made death feel different. And the second was that I wanted to work on myself and be close to the deepest fear of incarnation, which was the fear of death. That combination led me to start in about 1963 to work with dying people and to want to be available to them. What could I do? I wasn't a doctor, I wasn't a nurse, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an ordained priest. So the question, what I could offer a human being, I've realized I've purified the way to say it now over the years. What I have offered another human being is a spacious environment with my mind in which they can die as they need to die. I realize that I have no moral right to define how another person should die. That each individual has their own karma, their own stuff to work out. It's not my job to say, you should die beautifully, or you should die this way. I don't even know how they should die. Let me give you an example of that. I was helping my stepmother die. She was 69 or so, and she had developed cancer. And when she developed the cancer, she and I were good buddies, and my father was 18 years older than she was. My role was to be with her and to help her through this process. And she and I went to the doctors together, and we did the whole thing of getting all of the reports and dealing with all the emotions. Now, she was a very tough New England lady. She was a wonderful, grounded, tough poker-playing, smoking, just fun. She was argumentative and tough and willful. She had this kind of stiff upper lip way of living life. And so she was doing that around her death. My job wasn't to say, hey, Phyllis, you should open to this. That wasn't my moral right. My job was just to be there with her. And I would lay on the bed and we'd hold each other and we just talk, and we talk about death and what we thought it might be like and all. But she was still very, very strong. But the pain of the cancer was very intense. And over time, it finally wore away her will. And there came a moment shortly before, maybe 4 or 5 days before her death, when she gave up. Now, in our culture, giving up is seen as failure. Everybody says, keep trying, keep trying. We surround people that are dying with a certain kind of falseness that comes out of our own fear. When my mother, my natural mother, was dying, I remember it was back in '66, and she was in a hospital in Boston. I would be sitting with her, and in those days I was taking a lot of psychedelics, so I'd usually be on something, sitting with her. I watch people come into the room, all the relatives and doctors and nurses say, you're looking better, you're doing well, and then they go out of the room and say, she won't live the week. And I thought, how bizarre that a human being is going through one of the most profound transitions in their life and is surrounded completely by deception. Can you hear the pain of that? That nobody could be straight with them because everybody was too frightened, even the rabbi, all of them, everybody. And she and I talked about it. And she said, what do you think that is? I said, I don't know. I look at you and you're my friend, and it looks like you're in a building that's burning down, but you're still there. And I figure when the building burns, it'll go and you'll still be here. And in a way, we just met in that space. So Phyllis, I was open and she could ask whatever she wanted. I didn't say, now let me instruct you about dying, because she would have not accepted that. But then she gave up. And at the moment she surrendered, it was like watching an egg breaking. And some being emerged that was so radiantly beautiful and present and light and joyful. It was a being that she, at some deep intuitive level, knew herself to be, but had never been busy being all of her adult life. And she opened to this being, and she and I just basked in its radiance. And she, at that moment, had gone into another plane of consciousness where we were completely together talking, being, but the pain and the dying process was just phenomena that were occurring. At that moment, she was no longer busy dying. She was just being, and dying was happening. And to tell you how extraordinary this, just to complete this story, right at the last moment, she said, Richard, sit me up. Because I'm Richard to my family. She said, Richard, sit me up. So I sat her up. I put her legs over the bed, and her body was falling forward, so I put my hand on her chest, and her body fell back, so I put my other hand on the back, and her head was lolling, so I put my head against her head. And we were just sitting there together, and she took 3 breaths, slow, deep breaths, and she left. Now, if you read in the ancient Tibetan texts, the way in which conscious lamas leave their body, they sit up, they take 3 breaths, and they leave. Who was she? How did she know that? What was that about? I just want to play with you with the mysteries that I play with. Ramana Maharshi, who was a great Indian saint, was dying of cancer. And they said, let's treat it. And he said, no, it's time to drop this body. Because in India, it's called dropping the body. And you hear the implication of it, that there is something that drops the body. The body doesn't drop itself. The body is dropped. And his devotees started to cry. And they said, don't leave us, don't leave us. And he looked at them with confusion. He said, don't be silly. Where could I go? I'm just dying. Don't make such a big deal. It's like I'm just selling the Ford. It's not such a big deal. I'm just dying. So the dying center, in my mind, was an institution where people like me, who wanted to be around people that were dying as part of their spiritual work on themselves, would create the support system, whether they were nurses or doctors or attendants or whatever. And the place would be open to people who wished to use their death as a vehicle for their own awakening. Because as you're going through these processes, for a person that really sees life's journey as a one of spiritual work on oneself, this is an optimum set of experiences to work with the process of dying. So if you imagine now, you have an institution in which everybody in the institution is there in order to spiritually awaken. They're called monasteries or ashrams. If it happens, there are dyers and there are helpers of dyers there. But that's ground, not figure. The figure is the spiritual awakening. And everybody's there for the same reason. What I experience is that when I am with somebody, I work a lot with AIDS patients. Now here's a young person who very often is the object of social stigma. They're dealing with family rejection often. They're dealing with an opportunistic illness in which there are symptoms that are occurring in a jumbled mass, and you feel better, and then you feel sick, and then you hit here, and then hit there. They're dealing with economic difficulties. When I come in to be with them, the first thing I have to do when I sit down with them is to open myself to all my reactions to their predicament. The minute I try to deny it, it catches me. So I have to open myself to it. So I have to open myself to my empathic reactions. That is, to me as a separate entity, feeling what it would feel like if I were being socially ostracized, had an opportunistic illness, was young, didn't have a chance to live out my dreams, all of it, all of the pain of it. It's only when Zalman gave me a beautiful line. I was interviewing him for television, a show, and I said, Zalman, if you were an Israeli, what would you say to a Palestinian? And Zalman said, oi. Oi, such a problem. He said, before we can be with one another, we have to learn to grieve with one another. We have to open ourselves to grieve for the other person's loss and pain. And when they feel heard in the grief, then we can start to meet behind the grief. And what I've learned is, in whether I'm dealing in this, because I do a lot of work with political activists, and when I'm dealing with people of different ethnic origins and minority groups and all kinds of diversity, that I can always be my spiritual cuteness and up level and say, we're all one. What are you so busy being black or, Latino, Chicano, or whatever? They say, oh, that's not going to work. You are not hearing us. But if we sit with each other and grieve together, then we rise into the place of unity behind it. So when I sit with somebody, the first thing I have to do is open my heart as a separate entity to this other separate entity and go through the process of empathy. That's not compassion yet, that's empathy. As a separate entity feeling what they're feeling. To be able to do that is interesting. To be able to keep your heart open in hell, really. To keep your heart open when it's breaking in a situation. To do that requires that you have cultivated the spiritual perspective behind it that allows for the wisdom of the universe, that allows for this is a little much to say, but it's true, that allows for the perfection that exists even within the imperfection. And once you are rooted in that understanding, if you have stood back, if you've been able to stand back enough to see the beauties of the laws of the universe, to see the exquisite intricacy of the unfolding of the spark of God manifesting into form, Shekhinah, if you see that, just the brilliance of it, you are in awe. And at that point, the little mind that you have, which is just part of the manifestation, suddenly gets humble before that. And instead of saying, this is terrible, this suffering is awful, if I were doing it, I'd do it differently. You say, I really don't understand. But there's a place in me that has faith in the unfolding. What has happened to me as a result of inner work, which I am talking about and commending to you, is that two planes of consciousness, living both with the perfection and with the pain of the suffering, allows you to stay with the pain without pushing it away, because you have the balance within yourself. It's as if you're part of the unity and you're also separate. You're part of the unfolding of it all that includes suffering. Like with Phyllis, how am I to say now that the pain she went through that forced her to give up, that led to the spiritual awakening for her the few days before she died, I wouldn't have personally given her that pain, because I couldn't have done that. But am I to judge that as somehow wrong? And I'm faced with the paradox that I, as a human with a human emotional heart, want to take away your suffering. And at the same moment, there's another part of me that understands that suffering is grace. That suffering is the sandpaper from the spiritual point of view that is awakening people. And once you've started to spiritually awaken, you re-perceive your own suffering and start to work with it as a vehicle for awakening. Now, the interesting part of that paradox is you don't say to another person that says, oh, I'm suffering, you don't say, hey, it's grace. You have to give people space to do what they need to do. And if they're at the stage of their evolution where they see their suffering as this horrible thing that's being done to them, you can do the best you can to remove their suffering, the way they're experiencing this stuff. As my guru says, God comes to the hungry in the form of food, and you get what you need. So when I come in with somebody, let me give you an example. A woman, 42 years old, very wealthy, very beautiful, very talented, very creative, is dying of AIDS. And she comes to me several months before she's dying, and she said, Ramdas, I wonder if you would help me die. And I said, well, great, we'll do it together. So we started to meditate together, we started to talk, we started to read things and discuss them. And she said, I'd like to stay as conscious as I can through this process. Because you understand that the more you are aware of the spiritual nature of life, the more you see the moment of death as a moment for release, for taking off the tight shoe. And the art form in dying is that at the moment of death, you are neither grabbing at life nor pushing it away. You are neither pushing nor pulling. It's the attraction and aversion that keeps you holding to form. So to prepare for the moment of death, when the processes that go on in consciousness are a dissolving of boundaries, a speeding up of awareness, a kind of an opening and expanding, to be in that process where you don't go, no, and grab hold, one prepares. One prepares for the moment of death. And it's interesting that in almost all the Eastern traditions, people see one of the works of life is the preparation for the moment of death. Now, each person does what they can do. We don't make believe we're more ready than we are. So that I'm very pleased that we're getting to the point now where people can decide how much pain medication they need in collaboration with their doctor, rather than the nurse saying, you had it 4 hours ago, you can't have any more. Each person knows, and when they know they have control over the pain medication, they need a lot less, it turns out, because a lot of it is their fear of pain that they're dealing with. So with Mary, as I started to get to know her, she was an absolutely beautiful human being. Her family had ostracized her, and she had many, many wonderful friends. We started to be together in the hospital when she was finally in the hospital. We just sit and hold hands and look in one another's eyes. And what I then was able to do, see, after the first stage where you empathize with the pain of another person, then comes the next stage where you start to meet the person behind it all. It's like, are you in there? I'm in here. Far out. What are you doing in there?
Floor is open.
Something touched me in the last part of that. We discussed a little bit of it, but I've had extremely profound grief over the past just less than 2 years. But with that, most horrible of what I could think of in my life happening, I feel like it's opened up my spiritual awareness to a level that I don't know if I could even see it 2 years ago. And with that also, I feel that that grief was also a gift. And it's hard because I don't want the gift necessarily, but it's here and I have to unwrap it and I have to protect it. So it's just that shift of, without that grief, I wouldn't be here. So I'm holding that right now, working with that.
I too have experienced quite a bit of grief in the last year in particular. Like various identities that I clinged on to just burning into thin air. And then like another one, you know, another like slight version of a different identity. Which yeah, just kind of leaves the only thing left that's there, either clinging to like my last remaining costumes that seem like they're sort of intact, or just realizing that they're all fucking costumes that are just changing all the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's some version of a gift in that. It makes it very clear what's going on. And I found it also challenging in the sense that, which I'm still in the process of, there's like, it's like simultaneously seeing things as for what they are at a deeper level than I ever would have been able to, and like a contraction of the whole like survival machine at the same time. Because although I'm seeing things as they are, the ego is like grasping even harder. It's like, no, in ways that are like even unrelated to those deaths. It's just generally just grasping harder. And it's like I can both simultaneously be aware that that's happening in moments of clarity, and just also watching that that's just what's happening. Like the machine is like, so I don't know where that leaves me necessarily, other than it's really fascinating to embody that.
Yeah. To be able to see it means you can't be it. And that's a really essential part of the longer process of untying the enmeshment of mistaken identity. And life tends to bring us experience after experience to help us confront and untie that knot. And there's pain involved often. And what I've seen is the resistance to the process is a much deeper level of suffering and pain. And so in the opening centering tonight, I talked about the idea of just saying yes to what? To the process of life and trusting in it. And it doesn't at all guarantee that we sidestep the pain, but I think what it does help guarantee is that it's fruitful.
What's fruitful?
The process of life that is carrying you through whatever you need to go through. And that goes back again to Nisargadatta saying, I'm not afraid of death because I'm not afraid of life. If I resist, then I'm really going to be afraid of death. And it seems to me that if I can allow, to the degree I can simply allow the present moment to come through and move through and come through and move through and come through and move through, then when the time comes to drop this body and drop this incarnation, it will just move like that. Because I've been practicing my whole life, right? And we're practicing. Death is not the enemy. Resistance is. And the resistance comes from the ego. And so you could say the ego is the enemy, but even that, there actually is no inner enemy. There really is not. And the more we can settle into that, the more we are just able to let things flow through.
What about
Go ahead, Dina.
attachments? Like I feel like if I die, I'll never see my daughter again. You know, like that kind of stuff. Like the attachments, that's something that you need to, like, you know, you can just say, I'll let it go. Will I ever see her again? I don't know. Will I ever see my mother again? I don't know. So there's like the love and the connections that you have on a spiritual and a heart level. That's challenging to let go, like when you're in the moment of death or when you're in the moment of dying and you think, well, you know, I don't see them anymore. Or
Yeah, I understand. So let me ask you, your mother passed away how long ago?
it'll be 10 years in January.
Do you still feel the love?
Yes.
What's died?
Well, the physical.
Exactly. Has the absence of your mother's physicality diminished the love in you of her and from her and with her?
No.
Exactly. So to Ramdas's, back to his point, somebody said, like, well, what happens after you die? He said, honestly, I don't know. Because as a personality, we don't. As a personality, it's never occurred before on that level.
Right.
But on a soul level, it's an entirely different thing. And so everyone on this here tonight has had connection with one's soul. Otherwise, this whole evening would freak people out. They would not have any taste for it.
Yeah.
This whole subject, the idea of spiritual this and that. No. So there's something in us that knows. There's something in us that knows. And I mean, after my mom passed, 3 weeks later, I think I shared this with some people. I actually was out in Arizona doing some medicine work, and then I'm in Sedona, and I felt called to go to this particular place, and I felt called to go, and I found this singing bowl, which is an incredible singing bowl. So I found that, I bought it, and I walked around, and I was going to buy some, I wanted to buy some gifts for Wendy and Melissa, and I'm not great at that kind of thing. So it's like the fallback is go find some nice earrings, but that wasn't cutting it. So I'm here in this place, and there's just gorgeous crystals all over the place. And I'm just walking around and I'm just feeling it all out and go, that one is for Wendy. And I go, and that one's for Melissa, and that one's for me. So I buy it all. I put it in the car. This is 3 weeks after my mother passed away. And Wendy and Melissa and I were with her as she was dying. And it was just a beautiful process for her. She was in dementia, but there was something in her that was just really in a beautiful space for her. And she had really an easy death in that way after a lifetime of suffering. And I come out and I'm driving away with this in the car. And unlike anything I've ever experienced before, here was my mother, obviously out of her body, but in this joyful space a joy that my mother never experienced in her body.
Wow.
And what she said to me was, I am so I felt it. It wasn't just like, this was a transmission. So grateful for what you and Wendy and Melissa have done for me. Here are some gifts for you. And then we communicated a little bit, and so I know she's there. My father's there. My dear brother, 4 years younger than me, passed away at 56. Went through a very difficult, rare cancer, one-way trip through hell. But the love is here. What's the reality? What is? It's the love. It's not all the objects that we own, you know, it's not the bodies. This is the tough one, you know, because we're so convinced this is real, that this is who I am. If you listen to your linguistics, it even says it, right? My arm, this body, my body. Then people do that with their disease, my cancer, my arthritis. It's a mistaken identity. It's worth it to put in practice for yourself something that helps you to start to unwind the identification, the mistaken identification with the body. It's a long process because they were so deeply indoctrinated in it. It's worth the process. Very gradually, I could feel it happening, and as it does, that my awareness is naturally expanded, and it's almost like now that I am this field, and this is a localization that's just moving through and around the field and being guided by the field as an agent of the field, and it's different. It's great.
So should we speak in the third person?
Yeah, yeah. People do that, like the Jimmy from the Seinfeld episode. I mean, you could, but then people are not going to talk to you anymore. So, but what's useful to do, to resolve this part of things, we have to talk in I terms and my terms. So, and I do, but simultaneously, I know that's just a figure of speech. Like at some point, I came to profoundly understand, I'm not Eric, I just answer to that name. And they say, some various metaphysical authorities of sorts. I referenced the Seth material, which I digested a lot of in my 20s. He says that the soul actually only incarnates a small amount of the totality of its energy into this incarnation. In fact, you could imagine it as if it's having multiple energy streams coming down into parallel lives. We call them past lives, but in reality, time's not linear. That's only from this neurology, this perspective. But when you go out of that space, and I've been in that space both on psychedelics and not on psychedelics, where I'm in this understanding that it's all happening right now, because all there is right now. Then
that would be cool.
It's true.
That would be cool.
All you got to do is say, you know what? I'm open. Show me the way. Because you'll find, you'll be guided and find it in your own way. And then what I started to experience and understand is that these parallel incarnations are here to learn and to gather experience, to feed kind of back into the master, the super oversoul. But simultaneously, there's cross communication across the lives. So as one set of incarnations are learning various things, it's being passed to us in this incarnation. And as we're learning things here, it goes back in the other incarnations. And that happens whether you're consciously participating in it or not. But it's a lot more fun when you consciously participate in it. And so, what is death? I was sitting, again, in psychedelics, and don't discount the validity of these experiences. When you're using these medicines in a sacred, intentional way, they're extraordinary medicines. I am completely in the context as I'm on 5-MeO-DMT, very powerful, and this was a full dose, and it was very fast acting, and it's about 20 minutes, and I'm in as the I am. And I'm just, that's all there is. In the end, there's just I am, the infinite presence. And I'm going, oh my gosh, this is the ultimate integration. There's just one. And that's the deep truth. And the I am presence, not I am a person, not I am an engineer, not I am a spiritual talking head. It's I am. And that's the deepest identity, and it's not the end, it's the portal, because it's the first actual thought of existence when the baby starts to recognize its own existence. And therefore, it's also the portal out of that identification channel with this body. So working in the I am space is a powerful practice. At one time, again, I was on a pretty good dose of LSD, and I was in a yurt, 30-footer, and where John and I spend time, and I'm looking up out through the skylight and the trees, and it was an incredibly stormy day, and it's pelting. The rain is just pelting the yurt, and the trees are going, and I'm lying here in a complete ego death state, and the thought comes, that tree could fall right now and it's all over. And if it does, I'm good. I'm good. I would miss my family from the human part of me saying that. But if I am all there is, where could I go? Where could you go? It's just that we're stuffed into this little thing called a personality, called a neurology. Okay, we're here. Who knows why ultimately? Who cares why? Be here now. We'll find out. What more is there to say, really? So we're constantly dying and being reborn. That's the truth. Moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. And once we shift and start to see it that way and open up to what that means for us experientially, it teaches us. That's, go ahead.
Can I say something? Two things. One came up at the beginning and then has recurred since, and it relates to something you just said, which when you were talking about how there can be attachments to like our homes and the people that we love and our cushy lifestyle and all these things, it's like, to me, the things we most cherish, not the things necessarily that we are attached to, but the things that might have attachments but that are also based in real deep truth, like our deepest connections, our loved ones, the way, not necessarily our stuff, but the way it makes us feel. Like every aspect of what we cherish in this life is something that makes us feel at home. And when we die, how could we ever be more home than when we're out of the physical body? Like I have so many moments, especially over the last, since January, where I am like grieving and weeping being on earth, because I'm like, I just want to go home. Like I know, I remember my home. I just want to go home. And it's just like anything, you engage with it and you grieve it, and then it's this beautiful process, and then it moves through, and then, you know, I come back to like rejoicing of being a human. But in being with the grief, it's like everything that I cherish the most is just a reflection and the human level version of understanding of the truth of home. And I mean, yeah, from everything that I've felt, experienced, heard, admired, people talking about, everything that feels true to me is that there's nothing, like, we just go home. And so it's not like you're gonna lose anything, and you can't go anywhere. You just become that, you like become that feeling. So that was the first thing that kept coming up throughout this. And then the second was like when you said, so do we speak in third person? Sometimes I do. It just feels accurate.
She does. She does.
But because, and I wouldn't do that just in conversation, because there's ways where it can be so annoying when people do that. But what feels true to me is like, I am the steward of Melissa. Like I am her keeper. I am her protector. Like I am the one who who gets to have Melissa. Like, I get to have, like, that's so cool and such an honor. And so it does feel accurate to be in third person because it's not like I'm separate from Melissa at all, but it's not like I'm not contained to this. And so I thought it was interesting you brought that out because there is a deep truth in that. Yeah.
Can I reflect on the first thing you said?
Yeah, for sure.
The way that I understood it, I want to see if this checks out with you, is that like the things that we love the most in our life, our attachments, are in some way the ego's maybe false belief that those are the only portals to home. Because they are portals to home.
Right.
And then it forgets, ironically, that death is the like complete open freeway to home. But it feels as if those are in conflict, right? Which they're not at all. But it feels that way.
Because it believes that form is what is important.
Yeah.
And what's really important is essence.
So like what you said about portals to home, like absolutely. That's like for me, the perfect example, and even during the year at consecration, I talked about this, like homecoming, like living away right now. Coming here feels like a sacred sanctuary, and there's a essence that I cannot describe with anything other than the word home. And so I cherish this because it feels like home. Like so many things don't, and like what doesn't feel like home to me is going to feel like home to somebody else. But home to me, it's like the it thing. It's like you don't know. There's a huge variety of what each person's portals are, but you can't deny it when you feel it. Totally. It's like it is home, and so that is like, to me that's the promise of truth. It's like you're touching truth, and anything that's false just falls away, either throughout our life in the mini deaths or when we die. Like you can't hold on to any of it. So
and that anything that can go away is not home.
Yeah, anything that can fall away is not home.
Is not
so
home.
Like this, if my parents, when you aren't in bodies anymore, like I would never choose that, and it doesn't mean like they're not going to be here, because the home is where we exist together.
And it's okay to miss the form.
Yeah.
And grieve and not resist a grieving.
And simultaneously know that we are not form. What we truly are is not form. And otherwise, if you push that away, then you're pushing away the human side. And if you go into denial of all the essential parts of what you're talking about, then you go into denial of the divine side. And the skill, the art of the skill, is sitting right in the middle of those two places. And that's us, the nexus between heaven and earth, between the divine and the human. That's the balance point. That's the portal.
That's the I am the protector of your human.
That's the I am.
What I'm saying is the union.
Yeah.
Or that specific point where they come together is the I am the whatever, the keeper of this human, because that's the circle of growth.
Yeah.
I'm confused.
Be
honest. It's okay.
Next time we're going to go much more into grief, which is just an incredibly sharp knife. It's the sharpest knife I've ever experienced in my life. Just cuts through the bullshit all the way. I love being with you all. Thank you for this. We're going to do a little bit of a quiet sitting now, just to let this all come in and just integrate into us. Maybe 10 minutes or so. So much clarity and truth being shared in this room, in this Zoom. Let's just sit in this. You know, when we're done with this incarnation, I suspect there are going to be two fundamental questions I'm going to have to answer to. One, how much did I love? Two, how much was I me?